Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess it is. Good afternoon. Welcome back. My name is Brian Smith. I'm a member of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Beekeeping Association, and we're very pleased to put on this class for everybody. Again, and you saw this last week, our club has three purposes: education, letting people know not just in these classes, but we go out to various groups, schools, things like that, to educate people about beekeeping and bees. We work with our legislatures to make sure that the rules and regulations don't change to our impact. We recently worked with the legislature to make sure that we weren't limited in how much we could sell, and make sure that we didn't have to get a commercial kitchen to do our packaging for us. So things like that. That doesn't come up too often, but we do maintain relationships with the legislature. Networking, going out and meeting people. If you ask people how they do something in a hive, ask 10 people and you'll get 11 opinions. Okay, it's always good to see how other people are doing it. Beekeeping is an art, it's not a science. We can tell you all the facts and figures, but at the end of the day, it's what the bees are doing on your property in this year's weather. And that's always changing. So you gotta play with them, you gotta watch them, you gotta talk to them and work with them. You know, sometimes talking helps. We are also here to mentor you. We're also here to help you start out and answer your questions, because it can be scary. Bees can sting. Why do they sting? Under what conditions do they sting? I've got bees. I have a swarm of bees in my yard around the feeder. And if somebody was to walk by and look at that, they'd run. There's 3,000 or 4,000 bees in the air and on the ground right there. But they don't sting anybody because they're interested in getting the food, all that sweet stuff I have out for them. But you go to the hive and it's a different case. You really need to be careful. So one thing I want to take, before Fred starts to talk about his stuff, I did want, what's the next slide? Let's see. Yes, this is intro, or this is the life of the hive. We'll be talking about life of the hive and hive products. So a little bit about bee biology and what the bees make and do. And then the next session is our beekeeping year. Month by month, all through the year, what you have to do, what the bees are doing, and so you can plan ahead and know what's going on and be prepared. Next slide. Well, okay, and then the last thing on that was a field day. And we are going to have to prepare for that to make sure that next time you come, you're able to sign up and you'll know where you want to go and who you're going to be with to go out and have a field day. This is a recap of session 1. We talked to you about all the various reasons you might have to keep bees. And you have your own reasons. We're not going to decide for you. We are mostly hobbyists and some sideliners. In some clubs, there might be commercial people. At the state level, a hobbyist has up to 50 hives, I believe it is. 1 to 50 hives. A sideliner goes 50 to 300, and anything above 300 is a commercial beekeeper. Pretty much full-time, and in many cases, multiple employees. We're here to help you start successfully, okay, if you're interested. Next slide. Okay, Fred will speak in just a moment, but I wanted to share something with you. I'm an engineer, and I like to start from the fundamentals. And bees, Apis mellifera, the bee that makes honey for us, is not native to America. was brought over by the American colonists way back when. It started out in Europe 6 to 10 million years ago and grew up in the ancient forests, the old growth forests, where trees grew 4 to 6 feet in diameter. And they were hollow trees. They'd live a long time. Some trees became hollow. So the bees evolved with a stationary home of fixed size. And within the forest, they only had pollen and nectar for the first few months of the year. You didn't have any weeds on the ground because it was completely shaded with a canopy. So there were no flowers or anything on the ground. And if there were, they were very small quantities. They'd have to go out to the edges of the forest, and in many cases that could be several hundred miles. So the bees grew up knowing and became very good at sizing their population and gathering enough resources to be able to reproduce 10 months, 9 months later, the following year. Because every winter, with the cold weather, they would reduce in size like they do now, and then have enough honey and enough pollen, you need pollen to create brood, to grow quickly and let half the hive go off and start over again. That's the reproduction of the hive. So this is what you're working with, the evolutionary background. And what we do is we change things on them, and they don't understand what has happened. They simply react in the same way. So when we add boxes to the top of the hive, they say, aha, we can grow more larvae. We can store more honey, have a bigger hive, and be more successful for next year. And then in the middle of the summer, we take that away. And now they're back down to close to the original size. But there's other things too, because with all the flowers around, okay, they're not used to having that access to pollen. So in the middle of summer and in the late fall, like when the goldenrod comes out, there's a big bloom of goldenrod. The pollen just increased. Well, normally when they see a pollen increase, aha, spring is here. We better get busy collecting pollen and start getting ready for our swarm. But what they don't know is there's cold weather right after that pollen bloom. So you'll find bees that swarm in the fall, which is a pretty bad thing because now they've split their hive and they're not ready to go into a winter. But when they do that, we're ready to catch those swarms, feed them up, feed them through the winter, and now we have some more bees. So that would be a very productive hive. So these are a few of the things that we work with and try and figure out. And those are stereotypical things. They don't work for every hive. They don't always work. Okay? And that's where the art comes in. And that's where the fun comes in. So with that, I'll let Fred start talking about life in the hive as we know it. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Fred Taggy. I used to be an engineer, so that flavors kind of my view on life. I keep bees due north of Walmart in the past. Literally, when you walk out the front door of Walmart, you're about 400 yards south of my bees. Okay, this gives you, which means basically half of my flight circle is salt water. Not the best thing to do, but we have an awful lot of other things that go along. The first thing we're going to get into this is life in a hive and the pests that bother us. Okay, next slide. Here we go. Okay, we need to know the development cycle of the bees because we have to have a way to work with what they're going to do. You're not going to change what they're going to do, but you want to guide whatever they're doing into what you want to have. You need to plan for the annual decline. When honey flow stops and the last thing that blooms that provides a surplus of nectar on the coast is Chinese tallow or popcorn trees. About a quarter of Mississippi's honey comes from popcorn trees. There's a bunch of it out there. As soon as that stops, the bees still think there's lots of food out there, so they've got lots of brood in a hive. A lot of that brood may have mites in it. So when that brood cycle stops, when you need to do something at the end of that stuff hatching out or emerging from the frames, okay? That's an ideal time to treat for mites. Mites carry a bunch of other things. We'll get into that a little later. Miticides, your limit on what you can use down here because most miticides are temperature dependent. Some things work better than others, but you need to know what's going on in the hive when you put that stuff on. And monitoring for diseases, because the mites also are the main vector for viruses in the hive. Next slide. Okay, bee development. Everything starts with an egg, pretty much. Queen eggs and worker eggs are the same. A queen egg and a worker egg are both fertilized eggs. Drones are unfertilized eggs. An unfertilized egg turns into a male. And their whole purpose is to reproduce the hive during swarm season. They need to go out and find a queen. And actually, probably 40 or 50 of them will find a queen if one of them's available. A queen hive, get back, scale this up. Okay. A queen is going to be fed just royal jelly. Once royal jelly is made from pharyngeal glands, bottom mandibles, in the worker bees and the nurse bees. Basically, the infertile female bees. Workers are fed royal jelly for the first 3 or 4 days, and then they move to pollen and honey along with a little royal jelly. The interesting part about that is it's not the royal jelly that makes the queen, it's the pollen and nectar that make the worker. If they're going to feed a queen, they just feed her royal jelly. They give her a whole lot extra and cap off the cell, and then she eats whatever she wants until she's ready to pupate. Drones are male eggs. They last longer in the pupa stage, which means they are the best place for mites to lay eggs because they get more mites out of a drone than they will out of a worker or queen cell because they move faster. Brood refers to eggs, larvae, and pupa. Okay, everything that doesn't look like a bee in a hive that is still going to turn into a bee is brood. Now drones are accepted in pretty much any hive, which is one of the ways that diseases get spread around. They don't do really any work in a hive except eat. But when it comes time for a queen to mate, the more drones a virgin queen mates with, the longer she lives. Because as soon as she runs out of stored sperm, the rest, she'll start laying just drone eggs, and the hive dies. So the better she can mate, the better that queen is going to be for you. Some commercial breeders swap queens out every year so they don't have that problem. Next slide. Okay. That's it. The eggs grow in royal jelly. They're fed by nurse bees about every 15 minutes for the first 6 days of their pupa, their larval stage. If you take a frame of brood out, take the nurse bees off of it, or let the brood get cold, which is below about 70 degrees, all of the brood in that frame will die. So be careful with that. The eggs are all hatched in a bed of royal jelly. Only queens are fed exclusively with royal jelly. All larvae are fed for 6 days, and then the cell is capped. A female mite will go into an egg in a larva that's about to be capped, and then she gets capped in there with it. Depending on which one it is, it determines how many mites she can produce. The queen, she's going to be in a pupa stage for 7 days. If you keep them a little bit cooler, that stretches. A little warmer, it can get a little slower. There are people who raise queens in incubators and play that game. The bees are going to keep it about 96, 97 degrees around that queen all the time. Okay? Drones take 12 days, or workers take 12 days, and drones take 15 days. So a drone, when you look at the life cycle of mites, about every 3 days, you can get one more mite out of a cell. So they prefer drone cells because of that. Okay, capped brood, with the slide up here has got pictures of brood on the left. The top left one is one that has just turned from larva to brood, or to pupa. And then they go through several stages, purple eyes and brown eyes and then black eyes. A lot of the brood you'll see when you open a hive is broken cells that had drones in it. If you see a broken cell and you see pupa in the hive that's not in a cell, that's probably drone cell. Look at that real close, because if you've got mites in there, you'll see the mites on that pupa. They show up real well. Other than that, you almost can't see them on the bees. Once it's capped, you can move that capped brood around between hives anywhere you want. Brood frames, there you go. A brood frame, the very bottom of the brood frame is where the drones will be. There will be an arc of honey around the outside of it, and generally within that arc of honey is pollen storage. You can take that whole frame in a strong hive, shake the nurse bees off of it, and put it into a hive that's a little short, and they'll accept it and raise them as their own. If there's not a big heavy flow and you need to equal out you've got a hive with way more bees in it than you need to have for the stage the hive's in, that's an easy way to even them out, is just move a whole frame of brood frames. Types of bees, okay? The queen bee is mama bee. Every bee in a hive knows the smell of mama. and they will follow her wherever she wants to go. They also herd her to places to lay eggs. If you're looking for a queen, look for a circle of bees that are all looking towards the inside. That's where mama's going to be. It's somewhere in the middle of that. The other thing that allows you to see a queen is they move different. They've got longer legs and longer abdomen, so they wiggle different than the rest of all of the bees. Once you see that, they become a whole lot easier to spot. But you've got to see it the first couple of times to recognize what that movement is. And you only do that when you're in your hive. Workers are smaller than drones, and drones will be fed by workers. Drones are about the same size as the queen across the thorax, because it's very important for drones to have very strong flight muscles, because they catch a queen bee in mid-flight. If they can't catch her, they can't do anything anyway. When you look at a large bee in a hive, look at the top of the head. If it looks like it's one big eye all the way across the top, that's a drone. If you want to figure out how to handle bees, handle drones. Drones can't sting you. They don't have a stinger at all. So if you want to practice marking queens or practice on anything, practice on drones. They're easy. Okay, making a queen. Next hive. There you go. These are pictures of queen cups. The left side could be either a swarm cell or a supersedure cell. If the swarm cells are generally located on the bottom of the frame, but they can be anywhere. But if you just see one or two cells in the middle of a frame, like this picture, those may well be supersedure cells, and the bees have discovered there's a problem with the queen. She's not laying well. There may be some disease there. She may have broken a front leg. The queen bee measures a cell with her front legs before she lays an egg in it. If it's a big cell, she lays a drone egg. If it's a smaller cell, she'll lay a queen or a worker egg, fertilized egg. Now, when you start making queens, that's what the picture on the right is. The picture on the right is a queen cup, and those are set up, and you transfer 1 to 3 day old eggs, fertilized eggs, into those cups, and then put them in a queenless cell, in the queenless hive, and the hive will automatically turn all those cups into queen cells. And when they get them all capped, then you can decide whether you're going to hatch them out, what you're going to do to collect your extra queens. There's a couple other ways to do that, but that's the way the commercial guys do it. The queen bee's duties, okay? She lays lots of eggs, okay? She can do about 12 to 1,500 eggs a day during a good honey flow, which means you're losing 12 to 1,500 bees a day just by them aging out. She'll mate with at least five males, up to 50 has been documented. So, and she stores the semen in a sperm sac, and that's what she uses. Okay, she throws chemicals and pheromones that regulate the unity of the colony. When the colony is so full that her pheromones do not distribute well within a colony, that's one of the keys for the colony to swarm. There's too many bees in there, for the amount of space. So half to 2/3 of the bees will leave with mama and everything they can carry and start a new hive somewhere else. The earlier in the season that happens, the more likely they are to survive. Generally, a wild swarm has a 1 chance in 4 of surviving. So if you find a swarm, collect it, make it not a wild swarm, and feed it a little bit. It'll be happy. Okay. They'll usually run out of sperm at the end of the 2nd or 3rd year. So that's when they will, the hive will either die or the other bees in the colony will swarm her, cook her, basically, to kill the queen, and they'll make a new queen and send that one out to swarm, to mate. Okay, making a drone. Drone cells are larger. They're unfertilized eggs. They will protrude above the worker cells if they're on a same frame with the worker cell. Several of us use frames that are all drone size. That's part of an integrated pest management program. But it also says, I don't want drone cells in my honey, so I just give them a place to put drone cells, and they'll do that there. So there's advantages for both you and others. Drone cells will often be at the bottom of the comb. They'll also be between boxes. And when you take one frame out of the box and you see what you'll see is drone comb and exposed drones between the layers in the box. And that's probably the fastest and easiest time to look for mites. Okay, drones and duties. He just kind of hangs out in the hive. It takes several weeks for his his wing muscles to get strong enough that he may catch a queen. So he pretty much does what he wants. When it starts to get cold in the fall, the ladies throw them all out. So they don't have to feed them during the winter. They die immediately at mating, or they get kicked out in the winter. They will also move between hives anytime during the year. So you can get mites back in the hive, even if you're absolutely miteless, just by having one drone come visit. Okay, making a worker. This is a really pretty frame. Again, you'll have a little bit of food at the top. You should have food on both sides of it, usually honey or nectar that hasn't been turned into honey yet, and some form of pollen. The pollen will either be on the brood frame or on the frame facing it, so the worker bees don't have to go very far to get the pollen. Okay, the worker bee does everything in the hive. They prepare the cells for egg laying, they feed the larva and their queen, they make wax, they collect nectar, collect pollen, and store it as bee bread. And that's basically mixed with the yeast and nectar to break it down so it's a little more easily digestible. They collect resins to waterproof and seal the interior of the beehives, and they add a disinfectant to that. It's called propolis. If you leave any kind of a gap that's too small for a bee to fit in, they'll fill it. They will glue the whole hive together, and you can't get it apart if you don't keep track of it. They protect the hive, they patrol the hive for pests, and they find a whole new home. Now, everything except finding a new home, every single worker bee does at some time in their life. Okay? A bee can't make wax until it's about 10 days post-emergence. So before that, they're feeding cells and cleaning wax and whatever, and they may be taking wax from bees that are making wax and creating comb with it. But if you don't have 10-day-old bees, you don't get any wax. Part of cleaning a hive is you've got mortician bees that take dead bees out of the hive. They clean other things. And the last thing a bee does before it goes into the forager duty is generally guard bee. The cleaning duties, the first thing an emerging bee does is it cleans and polishes the cell that he came out of. Now there's a cocoon that they will spin inside that cell to pupate in. That stays in there. So they'll clean the inside of that cocoon, put a little layer of propolis on it, and it's ready for the next bee leg to be laid. If you keep the same brood comb all the time, your bees start getting smaller because they don't have enough room to fully grow. And then remove dead bees and debris from the hive. This will include things you actually put in there you want them to leave, like Swiffer sheets for catching hive beetles. If they can move them, they'll drag them out the bottom of the hive. Just plan on it. Okay, nurse bees. This is the first thing a worker bee does after she emerges from the cell. She cleans her cell, and then she starts feeding the babies. Okay, she makes royal jelly in the hypopharyngeal glands, which is up by the mouth, and they make bee bread. And that is, they eat the bee bread and then transfer it to the worker bee brood and the drone brood as part of feeding them. And they put enough in that cell for about 15 minutes. So about 15 minutes later, they got to go do it again. So don't leave a rack of brood out, even when it's hot, for more than about 15 minutes, because they'll run out of things to eat. House bees are the next thing that they do. House bees make wax. They make them in wax glands that are on the bottom of the abdomen. They add enzymes to convert nectar to honey. When a bee brings nectar back to the hive, it transfers it to the house bees, feeds it to the house bees. In the process of going to the honey stomach of the house bees, they add enzymes that help break down the complex sugars into simple sugars to make honey. And it may go through 15 or 20 house bees before it actually gets to where it's going to go. Pollen goes where it's going with the bees that carry it in. They distribute the pollen or pollen balls to make bee bread. They feed nectar and honey to forage bees. They do temperature control in the hive and humidity control. If the bees want about 97 degrees and 50% humidity. Getting 50% humidity down here is hard because it's almost always higher than that. So they'll be heating the air to drop the humidity and then evaporating water to cool the inside of the hive. So if you need to have good water sources close to wherever your bees are. They also plaster the hive with propolis. And that's basically plant resins that, again, they add enzymes to make this glue that they stick it together. Every pound of wax that the bees have to make in your hive will cost you about 7 pounds of honey, because the amount of energy resources that they bring in to make 7 pounds of honey is what's used to make 1 pound of wax. So the more wax that you can provide your bees early, the more honey you'll get out at the end of the year. Guard bees. They challenge everything trying to enter the hive. If it doesn't smell like their own bees, generally it doesn't want to get in. It stings to protect the hive. Large intruders can be intercepted up to 35 feet away. I've had hives that were considerably touchier than that. I had one that would chase me out to the road, which was over 100 feet from where the hive was. The temperament of those depends on noise, type of year, weather, how often you've been in there. If you've been disruptive to the hive, they'll remember. How to put this? Bees will recognize you. They can identify a human face. If you go in and smash bees and are rough with them, they'll remember and treat you like that. Field bee foraging. Foragers can collect many resources from the hive. Pollen is protein. Color varies according to the flower. If you see red maple pollen coming into your hive, it will be a light green. Goldenrod is bright orange. The scouts will go to every type of flower that's blooming within their flight circle. And a flight circle is a radius from your hive about 2.5 to 3 miles. They will pick the best nutrition source within that circle, and all the foragers will go there. Okay, field bees. Those are the ones that are in the last 2 or 3 weeks of their life. They've done 80% of their work for their life has been inside the hive, where they're not exposed to things that like to eat bees. So the last 20% of their life is spent flying their wings off, bringing resources in. Mostly you won't see dead field bees because they'll not make it home on the last flight. The number of trips per day depends on the distance, availability, and conditions. If it's rainy, they don't go very far. If it's cold, they don't go very far. They have to be at least 55 degrees for field bees to be able to travel any distance at all. Because if the wing muscles get colder than that, they can't make it. 15 to 20 miles an hour, depending on how much you're hauling. The large tongue is used to collect nectar from the bottom of the flower. And they also use that tongue to pull the moisture out of muddy ground. That's where they get salts and minerals. So when you see them on something that looks really gross, that's what they're after. They need the salts and minerals to raise brood, and they'll go find it. Salt is one of the better things you can use to help control hive beetles. We'll get into that. Bees eat protein, which is pollen. Different pollen has different types of protein. So they'll decide what kind of protein they need, and that's what they'll go fetch. Carbohydrates are nectar. And nectar has trace elements in it and trace nutrients, but nectar doesn't have the same nutrients from place to place. So whatever the bees need, that's what the scouts are going out looking for first thing in the morning. They want pollen from many species, so you get a balanced diet. They get nectar from many species, and the diversity provides a wide range of micronutrients. You can help with that when you put your water out. Okay, social creatures. Individuals serve the colony, period. The castes all have their same roles. And workers, their caste is determined by their emerging cohort, okay? All the bees that emerge on Tuesday will do the same thing in the hive and around it for the rest of their life on the particular day. So 10 days after they emerge, they're going to start making wax. 5 days after that, they're doing something else. They may be being guard bees or set propolis or whatever. Spring and summer bees, from the time they emerge to the time they die, is 5 to 8 weeks. So that 1,500 to 2,000 eggs that the queen can lay, all of those are going to die about the same day. So she has to keep laying those to keep the population up. Now, 8 weeks after the end of the pollen flow, she should have already decreased her egg laying requirement, and the bees that have emerged 8 weeks ago are pretty well gone, and that drops the volume of bees in the hive. That also decreases the number of bees available to guard the hive. You have to, as a beekeeper, manage the volume of the hive so that the bees inside the hive can effectively defend it. You have small hive beetles. Bees know how to deal with that if they don't have way too much stuff to hide, to cover. Queen bees can live for several years. Fall and winter bees are bees that down here hatch out in September and October. They have a much fattier internal body structures, which make them ideal targets for mites, but they can also live 3 to 6 months. So those are the ones that are going to get you through the cold time of year, and they'll be the ones that start collecting the red maple pollen as soon as it starts to pop out, because that's the first thing we're going to see here. Successful colonies can reproduce 1 to 3 times a year. If a colony reproduces or swarms, it will take about 2/3 of the bees that are in the colony and leave, which leaves about 1/3 of the bees to defend the hive. Now, a lot of what they leave is going to be brood that's starting to emerge. But it's also about 2 weeks before a hatched out queen can start laying eggs. So you've got about a 5-week break in the brood cycle where there's not enough bees to defend the hive volume the way they would like to, and mama's not making more bees. So the end of the area right after a swarm can be bad news. If there are more than one swarm cell, I had a hive this last year that was 3 boxes tall, didn't have much in the way of honey in it, absolutely brimming with bees. It swarmed until it wasn't anymore. It must have cast 8 or 10 swarms this year. And they all left. And then it got to where there wasn't enough to defend it, and they lost what was left. Any resources were left. As a beekeeper, your job is to split the hive before it swarms. That way you don't lose the bees and you don't lose the resources those bees took with them when they left the hive. That's why you'd like to go into the spring with at least 2 or 3 spare boxes ready to put bees in. And if you find swarm cells, find mama, move her and a bunch of bees into another box. The rest of the bees will figure she's already gone, and they won't swarm anymore. Just make sure you leave 2 or 3 queen cells in the old hive so that they can make their own queen. One of the problems with swarming is they tend to end up in your neighbors, and they, depending on whether or not they're beekeepers, don't really like that a lot. Okay, when they leave, that's the way the colony reproduces. That's how when you do a reproduction of the colony, you take half the bees and a queen and moot it into a new one. They make a new queen, and then they start reproducing the hive in the old boxes, the old location. Reproductive swarm season is during the honey flow. The honey flow here in a normal year, I haven't had one in a couple of years, starts 1st of February, is the earliest you can expect a swarm, and it ends with the end of the Chinese tallow bloom, which is usually middle of July, but it was second week of June this year. So you have to keep track of what's going on. A July to September swarm is generally absconding, which means something's not right in the hive. It either has too many mites, it may have tracheal mites, it may have any number of things that make that hive unfriendly for the bees to live in. So if you try to put that swarm back in the same hive, they're not going to stay anyway. At the very least you can do is put them in a new box with different comb and then do a slight treatment, and they may stay. But basically a July to September swarm will not survive the winter because there's not enough food for them. So whatever you can do, do it. But you have to change something if you try to put them back in the same box. Pests. Okay, the first pest that we have around here is wax moths. Don't think of them as a predator. Think of them as a vulture. If you're seeing wax moths in and around your hive is not strong enough to defend from wax moths. So something's obviously starting to go wrong early. So decrease the size of the hive. You can put a couple of things on a hive to try to keep the wax moths out. But wax moths don't kill hives. They clean up after the hive dies, and they make a terrible mess. But they're not the thing that kills a hive. Wax moths, when we think about wax moths down here, we think about the big ones, and they're yay long. If you have wax moths, your hive's weak. If you have chickens, wax moths makes them really happy. You just set the affected frames out and the chickens will clean it right up. If you like fishing, the wax moth larvae, panfish love them. So just because you've got them, it doesn't mean you can't use them for something. We also have a small wax moth down here. A big wax moth larva for pupa is about this long, generally about 3/4 inch. A small wax moth larva is just a little over 1/4 inch long. Large wax moths, if you freeze the frame, you kill the eggs. You can take a frame that has wax moths in it, stick it in a deep freeze for 4 days, take it back out, put it in with the bees will clean all the mess out, and they'll keep using the frame. Small wax moths, breachers don't kill. So if you have small wax moths, it takes a predichlorobenzene treatment or leave it in the winter, in the freezer most of the winter. They're more of a problem when you get them, and they're harder to get rid of. Okay, Max Wasp webbing, and it looks like just webs of silk spread over the top of the hive, of the frames. The bees don't like it because it tangles their feet, and it gives the wax moths a nice place to hide. Okay. The next thing that we have is varroa mites. And people talk about mites, they're generally talking about varroa mites. These are little red dots. They're about that big. Not much. They're arachnids. They use a moisture-filled sac to hang on to the bees. That's the sticky pad. Most of the effective varroa treatments for phoretic mites attack that pad. When the varroa can't hang on to the bees, they fall. And if you use a screen bottom board, I've got one down here we can look at, they'll fall through it. And then they can't get back up because their feet don't work anymore. The picture on the left is a varroa mite on drone brood. You can tell it's drone brood because the butts are round. So that gives you an idea how big the varroa mite is. They also will get on the thorax and in between the scutes on the abdomen. And they're looking for the fat glands on the inside of the bees. The fewer drones you have hatching out, the less you're going to be making varroa. One of the techniques for that is you make drone brood, and then you take the drone brood and put it in the freezer for a couple of days. You take it back out, scrape the tops off of it, put it back in a hive. The bees will clean it up. Mom will relay eggs in it. And most of the varroa in the hive will go back into that drone brood. For varroa females, enter the cell and lay a male egg first. That male egg will hatch on the larva one day before the cell is capped. Then every 2 or 3 days, the female lays another egg that turns in to another varroa larva. So you can lay up to 6 eggs in one cell, as specifically a drone cell, and about 4 of those will survive when the drone comes out. So 1 turns into 5 in drone cells. 1 turns into 2 in a worker cell. So it's a exponential growth as they get going. And if you look at the curve of bee population versus varroa population, your bee population is going to peak about mid-July. Your varroa population is going to peak in August, as all of the drones that were laid in mid-July come back out. And you have less bees to help defend from them. Colony collapse disorder was blamed on varroa. There are other things that contribute to it besides the varroa, but varroa is a big indicator. This is the biggest threat to your hive that you have as a beekeeper in South Mississippi. It's also tricky to treat. There are some treatments that work better up north that don't work down here at all. HopGuard is one of them that most of the beekeeper associations in South Mississippi or in Mississippi in general consider an unreliable treatment. It can, you can put it on any time, you can put it on whether you're making honey or whatever's going on in a hive. The problem is about half the time it doesn't work. So it's better than nothing, but don't count on it to knock all your varroa out. There are other techniques that work a little bit better. But you're going to have to treat for varroa somehow, because they'll take over the hive and kill it in the spring. If you lose a hive in February, you lost it due to varroa not being treated in September. Okay? Because your winter bees won't live long enough to make it to spring. Small hive beetles. Small hive beetles are little small black critters. They make a very satisfying crunch when you smash them. And the beetles themselves are not dangerous to the hive. The beetle larva eats brood, it eats pollen, it destroys any honey in the hive by pooping in it, and their poop has a yeast in it. That yeast will turn this nice thick honey that's in that hive into a liquid with about the same viscosity as alcohol. If you see honey running out the bottom of your hive, move fast, because you got hive beetles in there. And if you don't move fast, you're going to lose that hive. The larva burrows through the comb. It burrows under capping of honey. It burrows towards the bottom of the cells. They will eat any food that the bees have put down there. They will eat the brood itself. They will eat pupa. Wax moths are generally after the protein in the cocoons that the bees developed in. Small hive beetles are not that picky. They'll take any form of protein they can get. They also leave a really neat slime on everything that the larva has gone over that the bees really don't like. To reuse stuff after a beetle infestation, all of the frames have to be washed. They can be washed with bleach water. They can be salted and then washed. You don't want to put soap on anything, because soap is deadly to all insects, including your bees. A strong hive will trap larvae in jails. They'll make little propolis jails and keep the larvae or the beetles in there, so mama beetle can't lay any eggs. But they still trick the bees into feeding them, regrettably. That's one of the things that all the small hive beetles do, is they get the bees to feed them. When you disturb a cell or the hive, you break the jails. So, as a general rule, when I disturb a hive, I put some tanglefoot in there to catch the beetles before they can get them all stuck back in. Other problems are cockroaches, dragonflies, as I mentioned before. They like things coming back. Mice, skunks. Trick to skunks is keep your hives off the ground. Now, if skunks try to scratch in your hive, they like to scratch at the hive to get the guard bees to come out, and then they eat the guard bees. If they have to have their feet off the ground to scratch at the hive, their belly fur is not protective from bee stings. So the ones that come out find a nice target, and the skunk will generally decide not to come back. Scarlet tanagers like bees, and bears like bees. Luckily on the coast, we don't have a whole lot of black bears floating around. Remember that raccoons are first cousins to bears, though. So if they can get into the hive and get um, get at the brood cells is what the raccoons are looking for. That's protein for raccoons. Generally, it happens after something else has knocked the hive over, hurricane, tornado, whatever. If you keep the hive strapped together, they're not really a problem. Preventing pests. Sunny areas are a must for hive beetles. They don't like light. They hide in the top back corner of the hive. This is also where you put your tanglefoot. Swiffer sheets work well. Wash them first with a load of towels because it fluffs them and makes better tanglefoot. When you see beetles, crush them. Do not toss them on the ground. Beetle larvae have to go into the ground to pupate. The best way to keep from growing your own beetles is to make sure the ground under your hive won't support them. Okay, I use heavy visqueen, landscape timbers, roofing, but I put salt under all of it. And I put salt on top of it. So the edge of that system, the first place the beetle larvae could find to go into the ground, is fatal to the beetle larvae. They don't survive the salt. You freeze frames to kill eggs and pupa, specifically for hive beetles and large wax moths. You can reduce the entrance for weaker hives. You can put robbing screens on them. I have robbing screens on most of my hives, simply because they tend to get robbed a lot. With those, I don't have to worry about it. You can reduce the number of frames in the box. Now, this is a two-edged sword. If you have a 10-frame box and you put 8 frames in it, the bees will add 2 more frames off of the inner cover that you have trouble controlling. They'll fill up that whole space full of bees, full of comb, if they want to make comb. You can put an empty comb in there, as in a comb that doesn't have any cells drawn on it. As far as the bees are concerned, that's an empty box. It takes 2 or 3 bees to keep that whole thing clean, as opposed to a couple of hundred. And you can still get your box apart later. When they need to grow wax on it, they'll do it. But they don't grow your whole box into one big chunk. You need to actively monitor how many bees are in your box and to see if there's any pests showing up. You will see small hive beetles. The Swiffer sheets are a easy, inexpensive method to deal with it. I use a quarter sheet, 2 of them, in the back edge of the hive, and that'll usually clean them. The other thing to do is every time you see those sheets, change them, because the bees will propolis them and then they don't have any tanglefoot anymore, or they're full of beetles and you want to make them go away anyway. Just put them in a plastic bag and go walk on them somewhere, preferably on concrete. You need to medicate for varroa. Formic acid will kill the varroa under cappings, and that's the best way to do it down here, but you have to do it before the end of March, because after that, the temperature outside is hot enough that you can't use that particular product anymore. Then you have to move to something else. In the fall, by the time it gets cool enough to use a formic acid, Formic Pro, or any one of the formic acid treatments, it's already too late to treat for varroa. So there you need to use Apivar, oxalic acid. Oxalic acid naturally occurs in spinach. And that's after the honey flow. So you take your honey off and then put an oxalic acid treatment on it. Whatever that necessary works for you, that's what you need to do. Because if you don't treat it sometime after the honey flow, you're probably going to lose hives in the winter. Next questions.
Question. Yeah. Mr. Fred, do you have a solution for keeping cockroaches out of the hives?
Chickens work.
I don't have chickens. Any other solution? No other solution?
Well, chickens will keep them out of the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, but I'm not going to raise chickens. I already did that.
I haven't found anything that stops them, but I haven't found that cockroaches in the top, above the top cover of the hive are a problem. When they get down on the inside and start eating waxes and other things. But most of the time, the bees will keep them out of there if you've got a decent, strong hive. Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir. Okay.
You said that there was, like when people were talking about mites, that it was mainly varroa mites. Are there any other mites that beekeepers should be worried about?
Worried, no, but aware of, yes. There's a tracheal mite that's used to be the primary problem for mites and bees. The varroa has surpassed it considerably. The treatment for that is camphor or menthol. Both camphor and menthol will kill tracheal mites. Tracheal mites are more of a problem up north than they are down here. And to give you an idea, Hattiesburg trails the coast by 3 to 5 weeks in hive action. Just that little difference. When the bees are active here, 4 or 5 weeks later, they're going to be active up in Hattiesburg.
I'm Bob Collins. I'm a certified apprentice beekeeper. So I've been doing this, like I said, for 2 seasons. And if you caught the presentation 2 weeks ago, same stuff of why I got into beekeeping. We're going to talk today a little more in depth about hive products. Everybody knows you can get honey out of hives, but you can also get a lot of other things. You get bees, wax, pollen, and propolis. And I'll run real quick down what all that is. Honey, y'all know of. It's the classic juice you get from bees. And to bring that up, honey is not bee vomit. I have, well, that's what the slide says, but I have a little bit. Yeah, it goes into their honey stomach. It doesn't get digested. It gets little enzymes added to it, and then they regurgitate it in. So take it how you want it. It's not just the honey just vomiting up its all contents. They hold it in a special stomach, but that's just one thing. Huh? Pre-vomit? Okay, well, thank you. Pre-puke, pre-vomit, whatever you want to call it, but it's honey. We like to eat it. That's where I'll leave that right now. So whatever you want to think about it, if it's funny for the kids to think of it like that, go ahead. Honey can ferment. Honey, I had somebody ask me when I sold them some honey, how long does it last? I told them infinity. Technically true. They've found honey in King Tut's tomb, still edible after all thousands and thousands of years. But that's only if it is at the correct moisture content. Honey has to be around 17-18% moisture, hydration. Anything more than that, any more moisture in it, the yeast will start fermenting and honey will go bad. And believe me, I've been to some hive or two that got flooded out and the honey started fermenting. It does not smell good. However, you can ferment honey into mead. Mead is good. But like I said, those are the rates. It's, you got to do some math there. But one thing I meant to bring it, is a spectrometer. It's a little device there. It looks like a cheap plastic toy. You can get them like 15, 20, 25 bucks. You have to get one. You usually use them for making wine, for making beer and wine to see what the alcohol content is. They do have them that are calibrated specifically for honey. And you put the little drop of honey on the window, close it, hold it up to your eye at the light, and look at the graph and see where the line goes. If it's around 18, you're fine. That is if you get the honey before they cap it, but you can check that. Or just check your honey to see. So that's one way to do it. So, yes. Oh, sorry. Refractometer. I'm sorry, spectrum. It's a refractometer. So I will go back and correct that. Thank you. Yeah, spectrum refractometer. Yeah, it does judges refraction of the honey, of the light going through the honey, and to determine the moisture content. So thanks, Judy. So you need mentors here to help and set you straight. Again, you can kill the yeast in honey, but higher temperatures, if it's set at a higher temperature and left for a longer time, your honey will change taste. You don't want to really heat honey up too much. Like I said, I've got things that will heat it up to make it flow faster when you're bottling it. That's okay. Just don't crank it way up. You don't want to change the taste of your honey. There's even some beekeepers debate about you have the electric heated knife to remove the cappings from your honey frames before you extract them. Some people don't like to do that. I prefer not to do it because I just want to get the cappings off, not to potentially change the taste of honey. But it's up to you. You can have your opinions and how you decide you want to get your cappings off your honey. That right there is honey from different plants. We have 1.10 hives in our bee yard, and sometimes, depending on the year, depending on what plants they go for, the honey is different color. Like I said, this is one of our first harvests last year. It started to crystallize, but it's that nice golden color. But later in the fall, you can get the darker nectar coming in and makes darker honey. Honey has different aromas and flavors. Unless it's just a single species, unless you know you're in the middle of a pasture surrounded with clover, then you can call that clover honey. You know they're going to clover, that's it. If you don't know, it's wildflower. That's why you see different honeys say the different wildflower, they're clover, they're this, they're that. It's because they know pretty surely, specifically where the bees are getting their nectar from. It's kind of difficult to determine the qualities. And they believe that the taste, all honey has a similar taste at the end. Have different note of taste, but they all have a similar taste at the end, and they think it's part of a result of the sugars and the gluconic acid influencing that. The smells, the aromas are caused by some of the plant volatiles, which disappear the longer the honey is stored. You know, how a flower smells good and later it just kind of goes down. It's the volatile chemicals dissipate off and it goes away. They say darker honeys often have more dissolved plant oils and, that went off the side. So they have more dissolved plant oils. Honey, usually 17% water and 83% solids, with 98% of the solids being sugars. So, like I said, honey was the first sweetener. There's your average composition of honey. Like I say, fructose and glucose are the highest in the range, in the average and in the range. What to go to? Honey is antiseptic. Honey has been used thousands of years as a medicinal for a wound dressing. The hydrogen peroxide in honey, bees add an enzyme to the honey as they ripen it, and it converts glucose to gluconic acid, which produces hydrogen peroxide as a byproduct. And we all remember getting scrapes, your mom coming got to put hydrogen peroxide on it to clean it out. Well, honey has it. Honey from the Manuka tea tree in New Zealand has a special non-peroxide antiseptic called methylglyoxal. That's why you see honey that's called Manuka honey. Very expensive. It is very, very good medicinally. Another thing about this, about how honey's antiseptic. I saw recently Alexander the Great. Everybody knows he conquered most of the known world at a young age. When he died, thousands of miles away from home, he was put inside a coffin, glass and gold gilded coffin, filled with honey to preserve his body for the trip back home. So that's a lot of honey for that time of just crushing and straining the method. So that's a lot. Honey composition and cultural myths. Honey is not a nutritionally important source of vitamins and minerals. It's a good source of sugar. Honey should not be eaten by diabetics without a physician's consent, just because of the high sugar content. Also, you ever see on the labels, don't feed honey to infants under 1 year old, because there are spores inside the honey that a baby's stomach isn't equipped old enough to handle. And it can, like I said, it's got botulinum. So I would think that's botulism and all that. So do not feed honey to infants under 1 year old. I guess as soon as they turn one, bam, honey. I don't know how they decide that. Diabetes and honey. Diabetics have high blood sugar levels. Sugar in the diet must be limited for most diabetics. Honey is sugar. It's 100 times sweeter than your table sugar. So you may use a little bit less honey and get the same taste you would from multiple spoonfuls of sugar in your coffee. Honey and hay fever. It has to be local honey. It must also contain the pollen, traces of the pollen that causes hay fever, and must be relatively fresh honey. But most hay fever allergies are caused by pollens that are not collected by honeybees. Like you may be allergic to pine pollen. I know a lot of people are. You see it covering your cars. Bees will not touch pine pollen at all. That's why I was like, yay, I can finally get the pollen off my car. And when I get bees, no, they don't touch it. So the one thing that gets a sniffling sneezy, bees don't touch that. Where will you sell your honey? Retail sales of less than 500 gallons per year do not require inspection or license. So most of us, if we're small hives, a few hives, we're fine. We can sell it out of our house. It's the cottage food industry laws, if you want to look that up from Mississippi. Direct sales to consumers are allowed without a license, less than 500 gallons produced, no sales tax collected. Venues you can sell it at, you can sell it out of your home. We sell it out of our home through our website. We don't have people come into our house to buy honey. The city made sure, specifically when I applied for a license for business in Long Beach, that I wasn't selling it out of my house, or at my house. That's a whole different permit you gotta buy. You can sell it at farmers markets. Farmers markets, you need to talk to people to organize that. Usually they have their honey person, and it's hard to break into, because that honey person's there. They don't want two people selling honey for some reason, which it goes against competition. But anyway, and you can sell it within a booth within a store. You go to Frugal's, there's a booth there from this company up in Petal, this apiary in Petal that sells their honey locally. How will you sell it? You've got to seek the highest reasonable price possible. Honey right now goes roughly about $10 a pound. Honey, in fact, if you don't know, honey is sold by the pound, not by the quantity, not by the fluid ounces. 12 fluid ounces is 1 pound in honey world. It's denser than water. It's sold by the pound. It's a commodity, so they sell it like that. Like I said, about $10 a pound. You've got to know the labeling requirements. You've got to include specific, certain information on it, where it comes from, what your name and address and contact information is, and the warnings on it. You've got to sell that, so you need to look that up. You can use different kinds of jars, lids, labels, and labeling machinery to do this. I've got a certain kind of jars I use, and basically, based on what you use, how much work you put into it determines the price that you can sell your honey for. So, even you need to have a storage reserve for continuous sales of honey. Our initial hives this past year, we first got them, they got honey bound, and we didn't expect to have honey the first year, but we did. We pretty much sold out of that now, so now we've got to kind of build up again and get that going. So, next thing you get out of a hive is beeswax, which we have some here. Like this is actually from cappings from our honey we got and extracted. You can make candles, you can make anything you want out of it. If you do a little work, you can come up with things like we have these medallions. We have fire starters for charcoal grills or for bonfires. They got little wood smoking chips in them. The chips are soaked in the wax, and it's got a wick. You light that. Beeswax burns hotter and longer than regular wax, and there's no product, smokeless. It doesn't leave ash or anything like that behind. So you can use that. Do a little work. To get, I'll go back. To get the wax, basically what we do is we get the cappings off the wax of the honey. We extract our honey, whatever is left. We take all of the gunk and we put it inside this little device here. This is a solar wax melter. It's got an angled grid. You can come up and see it after the break, after we end. And see, it's got just a little tray that's angled and a filter screen and a capture thing. You put all the gunk you get from your wax cappings or anything like that, and you put that in there and you put it out in the sun. Put it in the driveway for a day on a hot summer day. That wax melts, goes down in that capture tray. All the gunk and debris is caught by the trap. And there's your wax. That's how we do that. If you do the crush and strain method of getting your honey, then you can take that wax after it's already got all the honey out of it and put it in there and capture your wax, purify it, and keep running it through to purify it and get clean wax. Yes? No, I don't. We let them soak and let it drip out by gravity. We will pour the honey through here to make sure it's pure. This is a 2-stage honey filter. Goes over a bucket. But yeah, we don't wash the cappings. We just let it sit for a while until it dries out. And then after we get what we can out of the solar wax melter, we put it in a straining bag, cheesecloth bag, get a crock pot, an old crock pot. We went to a flea market and bought one for $5 because once wax touches any of your kitchen utensils, that's it. They're used for your beekeeping. You don't want to cook with them or use them to eat again because it adheres to it and you just don't want to do that. But you put water inside the crock pot, put that bag full of the cappings and other wax product you want in there, and you set it, turn the crock pot on high, set it in there. That will melt the wax out, and once it's melted, you can pull the bag out and crush it and press it to get as much wax as you can. Get that out, turn the crock pot off. Next day you come out and you've got a layer of wax floating on top of the water. And you can even use pantyhose, cheap pantyhose, to do that, to strain it too. So go to the dollar store, get some pantyhose, and you can use that. So that's one way of getting the wax. And like I say, if you want to come, we have a that's honey. A honey extractor up here to see that. So comb storage. If you're not using a crush and strain and you have your frames full of wax, you've got the honey out of them, you can take them, because they'll be kind of dry, they'll still have little bits of honey in them. You take those out, put them back on the super, on top of your hive, let the bees clean them up for a day. They'll clean it up, they'll get all the honey off of it, and it'll dry out, and you can take those out or leave them in there and let them fill them up again if the flow's still going. So that's a way to recycle and store your comb. You can also freeze the comb to kill eggs and larvae of wax moths and small hive beetles if you know they're in there. Freeze them for 4 days. Take them out, let the chickens have them, or put them back in a hive. The bees will clean that up. They don't like anything dirty, so they will go through and clean all that up. Also, you've got to protect your combs during storage. If it's too hot, one thing you can do is we've got ours stacked up, and we have a plate and use moth crystals, not moth balls. You don't want to use moth balls. Moth balls and moth crystals are 2 different kinds of moth preventative. You want to use crystals. You don't want to use naphtha moth treatment at all. So the crystals, if you're going to say they're non-naphtha, that's what you want to use. You put those on top, close it up, and that will keep wax moths from coming in and destroying your brood comb. If you can't use these in the summertime because it's usually too hot, that stuff will dissipate within a day or two. You got to keep replenishing it. Or if you have room, put your comb in the freezer. If you have an old deep freezer, you can buy one off of Facebook Marketplace, eBay, wherever, or Craigslist. You can use an old freezer for that. Also, you can store them in open air and sunlit storage. Some people will take them to store in a covered shed area, open on the sides, with them on their sides facing daylight. Moths don't like the daylight, and as long as the air can flow through it and daylight can come and hit it, it'll be fine. I know a guy over in Oranger that does that, and he hasn't had a problem with it. So there's your open air storage right there. So you just stand in there where air and sunlight can get through them. any way you can do it. I've seen people take old bread racks from restaurants or grocery stores, whatever, bread racks, and they modify it so the frames will fit it. And just a whole bread rack this tall, full of frames. You just roll around and keep wherever you can. Okay, pollen. That's the other product you can get. There is a market for pollen. Pollen, I think recently they found out it's a superfood. Some people take it, put it on their shakes, on the ice cream, whatever, and eat it like that. Eating local pollen can help alleviate your allergies because it's made up of the things around here that stir up your allergies, and it can do that. Health food stores do sell pollen for human consumption. I think I just looked up the price of pollen. It's about $8 an ounce right now. And the way to collect it, we have this. There are pollen traps that you can put, and you can feed it back to the bees during the dearth. There's different pollen traps. The one on the top, that yellow one, we have used that. You attach it to the front entrance of your hive. It's got a little gate. With the gate up, the bees pass through, no problem. Put the gate down. When they go through it, it's just small enough for them to go, big enough for them to go through, but it scrapes the baskets, the little pods of pollen off their back legs into the tray on the bottom. And that's pretty much the principle of any pollen trap. This right here is a bottom board that is a solid bottom board, a screened bottom board, and a pollen trap all in one. I can make it solid, I can make it screened, and when I want to trap pollen, I just push this little insert in. Bees come in through the front. They have to go up through these little holes, scrapes the pollen off into a tray, and put it on for 2 days, and then take it off. Don't want to leave it on too long. You don't want to deprive the bees of their pollen. That's their protein, that's their food. But 2 days is good enough, and you can fill a tray with it. It's beautiful when you see all the different colors of pollen. I've even seen green pollen. So the other product is propolis. There is a market for propolis. Propolis is the bee glue that bees make. They get the sap and rosin from trees and plants, bring it back. I have seen, actually was able to see a bee with propolis or sap on their back legs instead of pollen. It's pretty cool. It's like just a drop of water. It was pretty neat to see. They bring that back, and they use it to seal up their hive. The way to get propolis, to trap it, is using a propolis trap, which is what this is. It looks like a queen excluder. The slots are a little smaller. No bees can get through this. What we do is you put it on the top super of your hive, usually early, late fall, and it goes under the inner cover or under the migratory cover of your hive. You put it there. The bees can't get through it. You put your inner cover or migratory cover on it, and take a couple of sticks and put under one side to open it up a little bit, to open the top up. So the bees can see daylight, they can feel the air coming through. They don't like that. They don't want daylight. So they want to keep a certain temperature in their hive. So they will come through and they will put propolis and seal it up so the air flows and the light flows like they want it. And this was done about November for a few weeks, and you can see the propolis blocking up some of the slots on here. And what you do is you take this off, you put it inside a unscented garbage bag, and put it in your freezer for a couple days. You pull it out, you just maneuver that around inside the garbage bag, because the frozen propolis will pop off. Because propolis is very brittle in the cold, and in summertime it's sticky. So you freeze it, you pop it off and take it out of the bag, put it in a jar. You can even grind it up with a spice grinder and use it like that or sell it. Like I said, you freeze it until it's brittle, and people can make tinctures out of it using alcohol, vodka, anything like that. This is a prescription tincture of it that a dermatologist prescribed for our daughter when she was a baby. She had a mole on her back that was looking kind of weird, and he said, put this on. It's made by bees before we were beekeepers and knew anything about it, and it cleared it up. I mean, very medicinal. Very, very good product. They use it. This is what keeps hives healthy. It's antibacterial, antimicrobial, very sterile. And the bees know it, and that's what they make it and keep the hive healthy. Okay, any questions about that? About any up here? This right here, in case you're wondering why I brought a keg to church, probably first and last time. Oh, sorry. How'd all that get? First and last time somebody brings a keg to church. This is actually done by Man Lake. They take old kegs and make them into honey bottlers. It's got a little heater. They put a heater down in the bottom of it. They put a non-drip bottling spout on it. You put your honey into that, pour it into there after it's been extracted and filtered and whatever you want to do to it. And it heats it up, and you can use that to bottle your honey. It's great. It's recycling, which is cool. So, oops, I'm going over far everything. Okay, real quick, I'm going to run through something that I came up with I wanted to do. We've taught you about some of the science of beekeeping, and we'll go over the next slide. Okay, I thought we ought to teach you just a little bit of history of the people whose shoulders we stand on doing beekeeping. Okay, this is about the greats of beekeeping. Just a few names you ought to know. It'll give you an overview of major innovators. The first, and now I guess, okay, the first person is the Reverend Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth. Tell me his parents didn't love alliteration to do that to a kid. In 1851, he discovered what we call bee space. There were already people developing over in Europe movable frame hives where you can move the frames and look at them and take them out, but they didn't know about bee space. He researched bees enough that he discovered that bees need 3/8 of an inch to maneuver in. If it's a space is less than 3/8 of an inch, it gets propolis on it. They block it up. If it's bigger than 3/8 of an inch, they build comb on it. He discovered that. That's why our frames, when you put them in a hive, are 3/8 of an inch apart. In 1852, he received a patent on the first movable frame beehive in America. Like I said, there were people at the same time in Europe figuring out movable frame hives, but he was a big innovator. In 1853, he published a book, which is still in print, by the people he partnered with, The Hive and the Honeybee. This is the 2015 edition. It's the latest edition they came out with. Everything you need to know about beekeeping or want to know or don't want to know is in that book, including the genomics of the bees, why they behave the way they do, everything. It's updated every few years by Datant. That's the company that does it. Really good book. I'm still working my way through it. Langstroth is known as the father of American beekeeping, so he is the top as far as we're concerned with bees. The next guy is Moses Quimby. He was in Newcastle, New York. Langstroth was in Pennsylvania. 1853, he published a book called The Mysteries of Beekeeping Explained. That was his major work. 1868, he invented what was called a new Quimby hive. It's just I'm not really sure what the new Quimby hive is, just some modern innovation. What he's known for is 1853, he invented the Quimby bellow smoker. We still use something similar today. He didn't patent it because he wanted to give it to the beekeeping community. He could have made money off of this. The difference in his had the spout straight up, as you can see, and his had a little flaw. If you look at a smoker, his smoker at the bottom, see at the bottom where it goes from the bellows into the can? It's one piece. It goes from there to there. His smoker had a habit of dying prematurely until later somebody came along, cut that little thing to let air in, and now we have a smoker. But he invented this that we use today. So that's his major contribution, which I think is pretty neat. It allows us to control the bees a little better. Charles Henry Turner, African-American from Cincinnati, Ohio. He was a noted zoologist for his time, in that time period. He ended up teaching at a high school, teaching, I think, chemistry or biology at a high school, most likely because he was unable to be employed at a major university due to his race. He was the first person to prove that insects can hear and distinguish pitch, which I believe is a major deal. He also discovered that honeybees can see visual patterns. Like Fred was talking about, they can recognize our faces. That's a visual pattern. He discovered that. Of course, I always say, well, the bees remember me, but in about 3 weeks, the ones that remember me may not be here. So, it's only for a short time. But his major contribution is he discovered that honeybees can see visual patterns. Johannes Mering, he was in Germany. He developed, 1857, developed an artificial foundation with a honeycomb pattern etched into the mold walls, like the foundation we're using now. So he developed that. But also what he did, in 1858, people liked using wax foundation. So you put plain wax on a sheet, you just got wax. He invented a device, a mill, almost like a printing press, you see that, or an old-fashioned clothes dryer, that had honeycomb pattern on its rollers. And you feed that sheet of wax through, and it presses it to the right thickness with the honeycomb pattern that we have on our foundations today. So that's his contribution. And then this interesting guy, Major Franz von Hruschka from Austria. Is that right? Vienna, Austria, yeah. He was a major. He retired in 1858. He began keeping bees. He was really busy. He raised and sold queens, raised Italian queens for Germany. I don't know why they needed so many queens. Manufactured beekeeping equipment, experimented with bee colonies, living without hives, and experimented with mating queens. So he was instrumental in that. His major contribution is 1865, he invented a honey extractor. And that first one on the left was a metal rectangle with a mesh netting and a funnel at the bottom and a loop at the top. You put a frame of honey there, and I guess you tie it to a string, or have two people spin it around as quickly as they could to sling the honey out after you pierce the cappings or remove the cappings. That worked okay. Then he decided to put it on a pedestal on a horizontal stick, leaning outwards, and tied a rope up the spindle with one end coming off the top, one end coming to the bottom, and a person on each side would pull it, almost like a sawing motion, like an early fire starter. I wouldn't want to be the person that walked into that with that big metal basket spinning around in the air. That's major. But then he refined it to this, which is inside a container, which is what we use today. The same principle, 1865, that is his contribution, the honey extractor. So in conclusion, even though the breakthroughs of beekeepers in this presentation occurred in the latter half of the 19th century, we are still using their information and equipment based on their devotion and research to beekeeping. So good ideas and practices are timeless. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the people that did all this for us. So, okay, any questions about anything else? And I think Brian will close us out. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Hope this information was of interest to you and helps you on your way as you become beekeepers. So we got even more next time it's month by month. Tell you what to expect each month, and then you could take that, we'll have the slides again until you know that, okay, in February you got to do these things, and in March you got to do those things. So it's a lot of fun. All right. Thanks, everybody.